Hours after announcing the ceasefire agreement, President Biden delivered his farewell address to the nation, capping 4 years in the White House as president and more than 5 decades in politics. Speaking from the Oval Office, Biden touted his legacy, but also issued a series of stark warnings to the country as he prepares to cede power to President-elect Trump.
I want to warn the country of some things that give me great concern. This is a dangerous concentration, and that's a dangerous concentration of power in the hands of a very few ultra-wealthy people. And the dangerous consequences if their abuse of power is left unchecked. Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead. I'm equally concerned about the potential rise of a tech-industrial complex that could pose real dangers for our country as well. Americans are being buried under an avalanche of misinformation and disinformation, enabling the abuse of power. The free press is crumbling. Editors are disappearing. Social media is giving up on fact-checking. The truth is smothered by lies told for power and for profit. We must hold the social platforms accountable to protect our children, our families, and our very democracy from the abuse of power. Meanwhile, artificial intelligence is the most consequential technology of our time, perhaps of all time. Nothing offers more profound possibilities and risks for our economy and our security, our society. Unless safeguards are in place, AI could spawn new threats to our rights, our way of life, to our privacy, how we work, and how we protect our nation. We must make sure AI is safe and trustworthy and good for all humankind. We need to amend the Constitution to make clear that no president is immune from crimes that he or she commits while in office. The president's power is not limited. It's not absolute, and it shouldn't be. After 50 years of public service, I give you my word. I still believe in the idea for which this nation stands. A nation where the strength of our institutions and the character of our people matter and must endure. Now it's your turn to stand guard. May you all be the keeper of the flame. May you keep the faith. I love America. You love it too. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you for this great honor.
Jonathan Lemire, it's always hard to figure out what will last, what will fall by the wayside as the years go by. But certainly with the rise of AI, hard not to imagine that his warning, again, his Eisenhower-like warning against the tech industrial complex as the power of AI rises, largely unregulated. And as Silicon Valley grows more powerful by the moment, again, largely unregulated, and the leaders there line up to make sure that Donald Trump will not have any need to go after them, to regulate them, to have the government doing what I think most Americans would want the government to do, having some sort of oversight role. That warning seems prescient. It seems like something we may be looking back on 20, 30 years from now with regret that more people didn't listen, just like more people didn't listen to Dwight Eisenhower.
Yeah, that's clearly the takeaway line here in this remarkable speech. There are two distinct themes last night the president delivered from the Oval Office. The first was sort of a love letter to the country, talking about the Statue of Liberty and those who built it and what it means for the nation. I'd say his own story was sprinkled in there a little bit. You could see the pictures behind him there on the desk, including his late son, Beau Biden. He talked about how he still loves America and believes in its future, and a defense somewhat of his record. And you could tell he made pointedly clear that he believes his team deserves the lion's share of the credit for this ceasefire deal in Gaza. But, Joe, you're right. It also, much of the speech was fairly dark and a real warning. He used the word oligarchs. Oligarchs, the United States of America. You know, he didn't name names, but it's pretty clear that some of these tech leaders surrounding Donald Trump right now were in his sights. He did talk indeed about the tech industrial complex, invoking Dwight Eisenhower's famous farewell speech. That included, of course, the worries about AI. He talked about the need to defend the United States still. And David Ignatius, you know, he 50 years, a 50-year career in public service. From the Senate, the vice presidency, the president. A lot of personal heartache here at the end. Obviously, disappointment that his mission was to defeat Donald Trump, which he did. A strong legislative record for a time, but then to relinquish the stage again and ahead of Donald Trump's return. What were some of your takeaways last night from his address, but in particular, that stark warning about the tech industrial complex, one that I believe is how this speech will be remembered?
I think that was the signature line. To me, the irony of his warning is that these tech leaders, until very recently, for the most part, had been seen as supporters of the Democratic Party. Silicon Valley had been a stronghold of liberal views, and that, in an extraordinary way, has flipped in the last year as prominent people, Mark Zuckerberg of Meta, Jeff Bezos, the head of Amazon, the person who owns the Washington Post, where I work, others in the tech industry have really embraced Trump, come to support his ideas. So I think it's that movement that's troubling President Biden. This tech industrial complex is at once the key to our future prosperity, our ability to be the dominant player in the world. The incredible innovation of our tech sector is one of the wonders of America. And in another sense, a danger whose dimensions we just don't understand very well yet. We see this huge complex, ever more powerful, ever more central to our economy. I would note that President Biden had an opportunity during his presidency to rein in these technology industries, to regulate them more, and generally held back from that. He was pressed by some progressives to do more. He didn't. His most decisive pronouncement on AI, the key technology, has been to work with the government for greater safety and transparency, not to suppress the technology or the leaders. So I think this, at the very end of the speech, what moved me was Biden in that kind of soft, almost wispy voice saying, now it's your turn. Yeah. And he has given his whole life to politics, to these public issues that matter so much. Now it's your turn. And he's really saying, I'm worried about some things like these oligarchs. Now you need to deal with them.
Right.
And Willie, of course, two things can be true at once. We talk about the explosion of America's economy, the strength overall of our GDP, our leadership in the world. So much of that does come from Silicon Valley. So much of that does come from our advantage with AI. But it seems a false choice continues to be presented by tech leaders, which is stay off our backs, stay out of our way. We've got this. If you try to regulate us at all, then you're playing right into China's hand. It is an all or nothing argument that, of course, is just not compelling, but it is compelling to politicians and many people in the incoming administration. It is one of the most powerful tools that humans have ever had their hands on, and the idea that we somehow are going to just turn this over to tech bros in Silicon Valley who are saying, trust us, much like Wall Street bankers were saying, trust us on credit default swaps, doesn't seem too compelling, but that does seem like the world we're going to be living in over the next 4 years.
And you're right, that's the argument they make. If you hamstring us, you're handing the future to China, you're handing the future to other countries, to our adversaries, and you don't want to do that. So put us at the wheel, and clearly many of them, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, all going to be at the inauguration with prominent seats behind the incoming president of the United States as Donald Trump is sworn in. A clear signal of who they support and who Donald Trump is there to support and who he trusts with our economy. So, Richard, when you think about AI, and there's a lot to talk about in that speech, so take this wherever you want, of Biden's speech last night on foreign policy particularly, but there's been this argument, too, that AI is too big to be legislated effectively. There's nothing that Washington could do. There's no law it could pass to control this thing that has spread into every device we use in every corner of our lives. So what is right now sort of the dominant thinking about regulating AI in this moment?
The short answer, it's going to resist regulation both domestically and internationally, because it's not just a domestic challenge. People have this image almost like arms control. Nuclear weapons emerged, and we regulated nuclear weapons through arms control agreements. But nuclear weapons are in the hands of two players, the United States and the Soviet Union. Incredibly hard to build. AI is decentralized, Willie. Plus, it's dynamic. It's changing. Since this show began this morning, it's already advanced. As a result, I actually think the chances for corralling AI, and since only the good parts we're going to embrace and we're going to push back against the bad parts, great idea in principle, extraordinarily difficult in practice. Can I say one thing about the speech also? Well, it was interesting to me. You used the word robber barons. That's a phrase I haven't heard in a while. The Vanderbilts, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers. And I almost saw this speech as an attempt to wrestle back the mantle of populism from the Republicans. Donald Trump has run a populist campaign, and that's a lot. He's the outsider. And what Joe Biden last night did was quite interesting. Almost try to reclaim populism for the Democratic Party. A lot of Biden's career has been about populism, the Midwesterner who's upset about the loss of manufacturing jobs, and been going after the oligarchs, which again is a really interesting phrase, and calling them robber barons. That to me was basically defining for the Democrats a line of attack for the future, the concentration of economic power and also the concentration of political power. And I think, like everyone else, I think that will be what will ultimately be remembered from this speech.
And David Ignatius, just briefly following up on what Richard said, I've been going back and been reading some works on Edmund Morris's, of course, extraordinary works on Teddy Roosevelt, and seeing so many parallels between the world that Roosevelt inherited after the assassination of McKinley and what Teddy Roosevelt did in focusing going after the trusts. And I find it, interesting that perhaps the Democrats' best way forward is looking back at a Republican president named Roosevelt that was not afraid to break up trusts that were only in the best interest of the richest of the rich in America at the turn of the century, and the J.P. Morgans, the biggest banks, the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies, you name it. And it seems to me Joe Biden was pointing in that direction and looking to the legacy of someone like Teddy Roosevelt that was able to break up some trusts.